She hit that old woman so hard the crack echoed off the buildings. Nobody moved. Nobody helped. They just stood there, phones up, recording, while the woman who had nothing left in the world bled into the rain. 3 days later, every single person in that crowd got a notification they will never forget. Hello friends, welcome to Stories by Jason. Before we start, please do not forget to support our channel by subscribing, liking, and sharing with your loved ones. Also, please let us know in the comments where you're watching from. The rain came down in curtains that Tuesday evening, the kind of rain that makes a city feel smaller and colder and more honest. It was the kind of night when people hurry, heads down, collars up, eyes forward because the streets belong to the rain, and everyone just wants to get inside. Angela Steve did not hurry. Angela Steve never hurried. She moved through the world the way her father had taught her to move, deliberately, without apology, as though the space around her existed only to frame her arrival. She was 26 years old. She wore a camel coat that cost more than most people's monthly rent, heels that added 3 deliberate inches to her already considerable presence, and an expression she had perfected over 2 decades of private schools and charity galas and boardroom dinners. A look that communicated, without words, that she had already assessed you and found you insufficient. She had just left a dinner at Marcello's, the kind of restaurant that doesn't have a sign outside because if you need to ask, you're not the clientele, and she was walking the half-block to where her driver, Marcus, was idling in a silver Range Rover with the heated seats already on. Her phone was in her hand. Her mind was elsewhere. That was when she saw the woman. She was sitting on the steps of the closed pharmacy on the corner of 5th and Leland, bundled inside a wet olive-green coat that might have been respectable once, decades ago. Her shoes were mismatched, one black flat, one brown boot, both soaked through. She had a plastic bag tucked under one arm and a small paper cup of coffee between both palms, the steam barely visible in the cold. Her name was Esther Adiz Okonkwo. She was 71 years old. She had been a schoolteacher for 34 years in Lagos and 11 years in the city. She had raised 3 children who had since scattered across 2 continents. She had been sleeping rough for 14 months, since the apartment complex where she'd rented for 9 years was purchased, gutted, and relisted at 3 times the price. She was waiting for the rain to ease. Angela didn't know any of that. Angela didn't look long enough to know anything. What she saw was an obstacle. Because Esther, seeking shelter from the rain, not even aware of Angela's approach, had shifted slightly on the steps, and the edge of her plastic bag drifted into the narrow path between the pharmacy wall and the parked cars. Angela's heel caught the bag's handle. She stumbled, just slightly, just enough that she had to grab the wall with her free hand to keep from going down. The phone stayed in her grip. The coat stayed dry. The dignity, her version of it, felt briefly, unacceptably threatened. She turned. The look on her face in the moment she turned was something several people caught on their phones, though they didn't know yet what they were capturing. It wasn't anger exactly. It was something colder. It was the expression of someone who has never been required to manage their impulses in the presence of someone they consider beneath accountability. "Watch what you're doing," Angela said. Esther looked up slowly. Her eyes were dark and calm and very, very tired. "I'm sorry, dear," she said, in that soft, precise way she had, the voice of a woman who had spent decades making children feel safe and seen. "I didn't mean to be in your way." Something about the tone, the complete absence of deference, the quiet dignity in it, seemed to detonate something in Angela. "You're always in the way," Angela said. "All of you, sitting here on every corner making this city look." Angela, this was Marcus, her driver, who had appeared at her elbow. He knew the signs. He'd seen them before. "The car's right here." She ignored him. "Get up," she said to Esther. "Get up and go somewhere else. You don't belong here." Esther looked at her for a long moment. Not with fear, not with anger, with something that, had Angela been capable of receiving it, might have cracked her open. A profound, sorrowful recognition. The look of a woman who has seen this particular species of cruelty many times and understands exactly what it costs the person expressing it. "I belong everywhere God's rain falls," Esther said quietly. It was a gentle sentence, a sentence that deserved to end the conversation. It did not end the conversation. What happened next was caught on at least 4 phones, from 4 angles, with varying clarity but unanimous content. Angela Steve reached out and shoved Esther Okonkwo, a 71-year-old woman, seated on wet steps, holding a paper cup of coffee with both hands in the chest, hard enough to send her backward. Esther's head connected with the iron railing at the top of the pharmacy steps with a sound that silenced the nearby crowd instantly. The paper cup flew. The plastic bag split. Esther did not get up. Marcus said Jesus and went to her. 2 bystanders did the same. Someone called 911. The phones kept recording. Angela Steve stood on the sidewalk for approximately 11 seconds, looking at the still form of the woman on the steps. Her face showed nothing readable. Then she pulled her coat straight, turned, walked to the Range Rover and got in. "Drive," she said. Marcus drove. He was shaking. In the back seat, Angela's phone was already lit with a call from her father. Samson Steve was not a man who panicked. He was a man who had spent 40 years converting crisis into leverage, and he treated the call from his daughter with the same cool precision he brought to hostile acquisitions. By the time Angela walked into the marble foyer of the Steve estate, Samson had already been on the phone with his legal team, his PR firm, a man whose name didn't appear on any website but who was known in certain circles as someone who could make things quiet, and through intermediaries, several people at the city's main social media moderation hubs. He met her in the foyer with a glass of water and no visible emotion. "Tell me exactly what happened," he said. She told him. He listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "Is she dead?" Angela asked. "We don't know yet," he said. "If she is." "If she is," Samson said, "then we move accordingly. The video will be managed. The witnesses will be approached. There will be a narrative. There is always a narrative, Angela. This is what it costs to build something like this." He gestured at the house, the art, the accumulated gravity of $4 billion. "You occasionally have to protect it." "She said I don't belong anywhere," Angela said. Her voice was strange, flat. "You belong everywhere," her father said without hesitation. "That woman had nothing. We have everything. That is not cruelty, that is consequence. Now go upstairs. Sleep. By morning this will be a manageable situation." By morning it appeared he was right. The videos were gone, or rather, the most shared versions of them had been flagged and removed with a speed that suggested human intervention at the platform level. The story had appeared briefly on 2 local news sites, then been quietly walked back. Sources cited developing information and conflicting witness accounts. The witnesses near the pharmacy had each, separately, received visits from very polite men in suits who had discussed, in careful terms, the various ways that involvement in a high-profile legal matter could complicate one's life. Esther Okonkwo had been transported to St. Augustine's Medical Center, where she had been pronounced dead at 11:52 p.m., cause listed as blunt force trauma to the head consistent with a fall. The death was logged. The paperwork existed. The body was transferred to the city morgue pending next of kin notification, a notification that, since no next of kin had yet been located, seemed likely to take some time. Samson Steve called it a sad accident. He made a generous donation to a homeless outreach organization. He issued a brief, carefully worded statement expressing deep sympathy for any suffering and full cooperation with authorities. He did not mention his daughter's name. He didn't need to. By noon of the next day, it looked, from the outside, like nothing had happened at all. Angela went to a spa appointment. She was in the steam room when her phone, which she'd left in her locker, began receiving, one by one, 17 text messages from numbers she didn't recognize. She would not see them until later, but when she did, every single one of them said the same 2 words. 3 days. Angela had never had trouble sleeping. Sleep, for her, was something she summoned the way she summoned everything else, deliberately, efficiently, on her own terms. She had a weighted blanket, a white noise machine, blackout curtains engineered to block every photon, and a nightly regimen that her wellness consultant had calibrated to her particular biology. That first night, none of it worked. She lay in the dark of her bedroom, a room the size of a generous apartment, furnished in the kind of quiet luxury that doesn't announce itself, and felt something she couldn't name. Not guilt. She would have recognized guilt. She'd felt traces of it before and had always found ways to metabolize it into something more manageable. Justification, context, distance. This was different. This was a heaviness that seemed to exist in the air itself, as though the room's atmosphere had shifted in some molecular way. She turned over, closed her eyes. She heard very distinctly the sound of rain. This was strange because she was on the third floor of a sealed, climate-controlled house, and the rain had stopped hours ago. She opened her eyes. The blackout curtains were absolutely still. She closed her eyes again. The rain continued, softer now, more like the memory of rain, like water heard through a wall. And then from somewhere inside that soft sound, she heard a voice. It was Esther's voice. She knew this the way you know things in the moment before sleep, with a certainty that bypasses logic. It was low and unhurried, the same measured cadence she'd heard on those pharmacy steps, and it was saying something Angela couldn't quite resolve into words. Not in English, not in any language she recognized. Something rhythmic and ancient that felt less like speech and more like something being counted. Angela sat up and turned on the light. The room was empty. The rain sound was gone. The silence that replaced it was total and somehow heavier than the sound had been. She got up, went to the bathroom, ran cold water over her wrists the way her mother had taught her to when she was anxious as a child. A memory so old and so unexpected that it startled her, because her mother had left when Angela was 8, and she had spent considerable energy not thinking about her since. She looked at herself in the mirror. For just a moment, she would later tell herself it was a trick of the light, a product of exhaustion, a hallucination. The face in the mirror was not hers. It was an older face, dark eyes, deeply tired, full of something vast and patient, a face that had seen decades of seasons and survived them, a face that was looking at her not with hatred, not with accusation, but with something far more devastating, recognition. Angela screamed and stepped back. She knocked her elbow on the towel rack and hissed at the pain and looked at the mirror again. Her own face looked back at her, pale, eyes wide. She stood there for a long time. Then she went back to bed and lay there, eyes open, until the ceiling slowly brightened with the first gray light of morning. Her father noticed something was wrong at breakfast. He noticed because Angela was eating, pushing toast around a plate, which was not behavior he associated with his daughter, who approached meals the way she approached everything, with decisive, unsentimental purpose. "You look terrible," he said. He didn't mean it unkindly, it was an observation. "I didn't sleep," she said. "That's normal stress response." He poured his coffee. "The situation is stable. I spoke with the DA's office through channels. There won't be charges. The official position is that she fell." Angela looked at the toast. She was 71, she said. "Angela, I'm just saying." "Don't," he said, not harshly, just with that particular paternal finality she had grown up navigating. "Don't do that. Don't begin that sentence. You made a mistake in the heat of a difficult moment, and that mistake has been managed. We move forward. That's what we do." She nodded. She picked up her coffee. From upstairs, from the direction of her bedroom, she heard a faint sound, so brief and soft she almost dismissed it. But she caught it clearly enough to place it, and when she did, the coffee cup settled wrong in her grip, and a small amount spilled on the tablecloth. The sound was a woman's voice, counting slowly, in a language Angela didn't speak. She looked up at the ceiling. Her father was already looking at his phone. She did not tell him what she'd heard. The house changed that day, in ways that Angela could feel but not prove. Doors she remembered closing were open. Rooms she entered felt recently vacated, a displacement in the air, a warmth that didn't quite match the temperature. Her phone behaved strangely. Messages she was composing disappeared mid-sentence. Photos in her camera roll showed shots she hadn't taken, blurry, dark images that resolved when she looked closely into street scenes she half recognized. Rain on pavement, a pharmacy step, a paper cup on its side. She deleted them, they came back. She called her tech person who accessed her phone remotely and found nothing. No malware, no unauthorized access, no backup syncing from an unknown device. "It's fine," he told her. "Maybe a software glitch." The photos were gone again when he looked. When she hung up and checked, they were back. That afternoon, she went to the East Wing sitting room and found the television on. She hadn't turned it on. The channel was a local access station showing grainy archival footage of something she couldn't immediately place: a schoolroom African somewhere, children in neat rows, a woman at the chalkboard. The woman at the chalkboard had her back turned. Angela watched for a moment, hand on the remote. The woman at the chalkboard slowly turned around. Angela turned the television off and left the room, and did not go back. She called her best friend, Domino, and asked if she could come over. Domino said yes, and they sat in the main lounge drinking wine and talking about nothing important, and Angela felt, for a little while, like the house was just a house. But when Domino excused herself to use the bathroom and Angela was momentarily alone, she felt it again, that weighted quality in the air, like something enormous and unhurried holding its breath just outside the frame of normal perception. Domino came back from the bathroom, looking slightly odd. "What?" Angela said. "Nothing," Domino said. "The bathroom mirror is cracked." "It wasn't cracked this morning," Angela said. "Well, it is now," Domino said. "Right down the middle it looks." She stopped. "Looks what?" Domino took a sip of wine. "Like something on the other side hit it," she said. Then quickly, "I'm sure it's just the temperature change. Old houses settle." The house was 9 years old and had been built to aerospace engineering tolerances. Angela didn't say this. That night she found on her pillow, which had been freshly made by the housekeeper that afternoon, a single item: a paper coffee cup, small, the kind dispensed from a corner cart machine. It was empty. It was dry. There was no coffee ring, no moisture, no evidence it had ever been used. It was cold to the touch in the way that metal gets cold, not paper, a deep, cellular cold that seemed to come from inside it. Angela held it in both palms for a long time, the way Esther had held her cup in the rain. She did not sleep at all that night. On the second morning, Angela Steve did not wake up in her bedroom. She woke up cold. The cold came first, a bone-level, total cold that she registered before consciousness fully arrived, before she understood where she was or why she couldn't feel her fingers properly, or why the thing beneath her cheek was hard and slightly damp and smelled of concrete and old rain. She opened her eyes. She was on the pharmacy steps on the corner of 5th and Leland. The city was beginning its morning, distant traffic, the sound of a delivery truck somewhere, a pigeon working its way across the sidewalk with bureaucratic focus. The sky above her was the pale, non-committal gray of early dawn. She sat up. She looked at her hands, were an old woman's hands, dark-knuckled, creased, the hands of a life's worth of work. She was wearing the olive-green coat, the mismatched shoes. She was Esther. Not in the way of a dream, which she understood to be a dream while inside it. This was different. This was fully sensory, fully present, fully real in the way that only the body's experience of cold and hunger and the hard bite of a step's edge against the back of a thigh can be real. She could feel everything. She felt, with particular and humbling precision, how much everything hurt, not dramatically. Not like injury, but with the low, constant, background ache of a body that had been sleeping rough for 14 months, that had been rained on too many times and underfed for too long, and had long since stopped expecting comfort, and had simply organized itself around endurance. People walked past, they did not look at her. This was the part she had not expected, and it was the part that broke something open. People walked past and not one of them looked at her. Not out of hostility. The hostility, she had learned, usually came from the ones who did look. No, these people simply did not see her. She was below the threshold of acknowledgement. She was part of the backdrop of the city, part of the ambient landscape, like a mailbox or a fire hydrant or a change in the pavement texture. She was Esther. She was invisible. She tried to stand up and her hip protested in a way that forced her back down before she was fully upright. She tried again, slowly this time, bracing against the railing, the same railing, and managed it. She spent that day on the streets. She tried to find warmth. The library opened at 9. She went in and a security guard followed her through the atrium until she sat down, then stationed himself nearby in a way that was technically not harassment but was also technically nothing else. She found a seat by the radiator. It helped. A woman with a stroller sat down across from her and then, after a moment's assessment, relocated to another bench. She tried to eat. A shelter 2 blocks west served breakfast until 8. She'd missed it. The next meal service was at noon. She sat in the park near the shelter with about 15 other people, all of them Esther's world, men and women she hadn't seen before, hadn't considered before, the people who existed in the specific geography of need that she had always walked past. An old man with a kind face shared half a granola bar with her. She ate it. She cried quietly, which nobody noticed because nobody was watching. She thought about the Range Rover with the heated seats. She thought about the dinner at Marcello's. She thought about the camel coat, dry clean only. She thought about what her father had said. She had nothing. We have everything. That is not cruelty, that is consequence. And sitting there in the cold park in an old woman's painful body, wearing an old woman's soaked shoes, she thought, he was wrong. He has always been wrong. And I let him teach me that. I chose to let him teach me that. She wept until the cold made it impractical, and then she sat quietly and watched the city move around her. The city that had always been hers, that she had never once truly seen. Back in the Steve mansion, or rather, in Angela's body in the Steve mansion, Samson Steve was having an increasingly alarming morning. His daughter had not come down to breakfast. When he sent the housekeeper to check, she returned with a white face and a report that Miss Angela appeared to be in her room in bed, but was unresponsive, like she's there but not there. He went upstairs and found her exactly that, lying in her bed, eyes slightly open, breathing normally, pulse regular, but entirely unresponsive to touch or sound. Like a person very deeply asleep, except that no sleep looked quite like this. Too still, too settled, too absent. He called the family physician. He called 2 specialists. He did not call an ambulance, because an ambulance meant a report, and a report meant questions. And questions were the one thing Samson Steve had spent a lifetime learning to prevent. The doctors could find nothing wrong. Unusual dissociative state, one of them ventured. Possibly stress-triggered, she may need. She needs to wake up, Samson said. She did not wake up. Samson spent the day making calls, managing the estate, monitoring the news, which remained, by his engineering, quiet. He sat with his daughter twice, in the late afternoon and again in the evening, and both times he was struck by something that cost him more than he would admit. She looked, lying there, extraordinarily young. She looked the way she had looked as a child, that brief window before the weight of his ambitions and expectations had settled over her and solidified into the woman she'd become. She had been a gentle child, he remembered. She had been curious about everything and kind to animals, and she'd gone through a phase at age 7 of leaving her dinner outside for a stray cat on their block. He had not encouraged this. He had not encouraged gentleness, because the world, his world, consumed the gentle. He sat and looked at her, and for the first time in perhaps a decade, Samson Steve felt something he did not know how to convert into strategy. He felt afraid that he had made a terrible mistake. Not about the Tuesday night, about 20 years of Tuesday nights. On the street, Angela and Esther watched the sun set and felt the temperature drop, and moved with the others toward the evening shelter 3 blocks east. She was almost there when she passed the pharmacy. She stopped. A girl, maybe 19, was sitting on the steps, not in distress, just sheltering briefly from the wind, earbuds in, waiting for someone. She looked up and saw Angela, and her expression arranged itself into that particular micro-expression. The brief, involuntary assessment, the downward calibration, and she looked back at her phone. Angela stood very still on the sidewalk. She thought, that is what I looked like. That exact thing. That is what I did 10,000 times and called it nothing, called it Tuesday, called it walking down a street. She thought, how did I not know what that felt like? How did I not know? She walked on to the shelter. She ate soup. She slept on a cot in a room with 37 other people, and listened to the various sounds of 37 exhausted bodies trying to rest, and did not sleep herself until very late, and when she did, she dreamed of her mother's kitchen, and the sound of rain, and a blackboard with something written on it in chalk that she could almost read. The 3rd day began with a notification. Not on Angela's phone, on every phone in the city, or so it seemed. By 6 a.m., the video had appeared in what seemed like every platform, every channel, every group chat simultaneously. Not one of the videos that had been suppressed, those were managed, scrubbed, gone. This was different footage. This was footage from an angle that shouldn't have existed, from directly above, looking down, as though from a camera positioned on the building's roof. A building, Police would later confirm that had no roof-mounted cameras, had never had roof-mounted cameras, and showed no sign of having had any equipment installed. The footage was crisp, unambiguous, complete. It showed everything. By 7 a.m. it had been viewed 4 million times. By 9 a.m., 11 million. By noon, Billionaire's daughter was trending in 17 countries simultaneously, and protesters had gathered outside the Steve estate gates. Not the modest handful that such stories sometimes generated, but hundreds, then thousands. A gathering with the unmistakable quality of something that had been building for longer than this single incident. Something about who is visible and who is not, who falls and who gets caught. Inside the estate, Samson's phone didn't stop ringing. His PR firm sent a message saying they were suspending their contract pending reputational assessment. His general counsel called to say that the DA's office, the one he'd accessed through channels, had called to say that those channels no longer applied. There would be charges. There was video. There was a crowd of witnesses re-emboldened by the footage, coming forward now, all speaking with the coherence of people who had always known what they saw and had been quietly, powerfully persuaded to doubt it. At 9:47 a.m., Angela opened her eyes. She was in her bedroom, her own body, her own ceiling. The weighted blanket, the white noise machine, the blackout curtains, now slightly open to let in a narrow blade of morning light. She lay still for a moment. She felt her own hands, young, smooth, unhurt, and she made a sound she didn't expect to make. Something between a sob and an exhale. Relief at being herself, grief at being herself. Both things absolutely true. She sat up. She could hear through the walls the distant noise of the crowd at the gate. She stood. She walked to the window and looked out at the lawn, where a security team was conferring with what looked like the beginning of a press encampment, and beyond the gate, the gathered people with their signs and their phones. She looked at her own phone. 17 missed calls, 43 texts, 100 notifications. She set the phone down and turned. Esther was standing in the center of the room. She was not how she had been on the steps. She was not wet or cold or diminished. She was standing straight-backed in a way that suggested her painful hip was no longer relevant, dressed in a plain white blouse and dark skirt, her gray hair precisely pinned, her hands clasped at her waist, the posture, Angela recognized with a lurch, of a teacher facing a class. Her dark eyes were calm and absolute and entirely without malice, which was somehow the most frightening thing about her. "You've been to my life," Esther said. Her voice was the same, low, precise, unhurried. "You've spent a day inside what you destroyed." Angela's throat wouldn't work immediately. When it did, she said, "Are you?" and couldn't finish the question. "I am here," Esther said, in a tone that foreclosed elaboration. "That's what matters right now." "I hurt you," Angela said. The word she needed was too small. "I killed you." "You made choices," Esther said. "Tonight you will make more. That's what I'm here for, not revenge. Revenge is easy and solves nothing. I am here because every act creates a debt, and debts don't disappear because powerful people ignore them. They grow. They compound. And eventually," she held Angela's gaze, "they must be settled." Angela said, "What do you want from me?" "I want nothing," Esther said. "It's not about wanting, it's about what is required. There is a debt. There is a crowd at your gate. There is footage. There are charges being prepared. Your father will offer you an escape. He will offer you lawyers and narratives and distance and time. He believes that enough time and enough money makes anything survivable." "He's usually right," Angela said. Her voice cracked on the last word. "He is right about money," Esther said quietly. "He is wrong about debt." She took one step toward Angela, and her presence in the room seemed to expand, as though she occupied a larger space than her body suggested. "I taught children for 45 years. I taught them that a life is not measured by what you accumulate but by what you repair. I lost my home because the people who decided your rent also decide whether you are visible. I sat on those steps because the city I had given my adult life to had stopped seeing me." She paused. "You were not the first person to look at me and see nothing, but you were the first to make that nothing violent." Angela was crying. She didn't try to stop it. "I spent a day being you," she said. "Being invisible, being." "Not a day," Esther said, with something that might in other circumstances have been called patience. "You spent a day. I spent 14 months, And before that, a lifetime of being told in small and large ways that I occupied space at the tolerance of people like your father. She let that settle. A day was enough for you to begin to understand. That understanding is what I needed you to have before you make your choice. What choice? Angela said, though she already knew. Your father is arranging right now for you to disappear. A flight, private, off-record, a villa somewhere without extradition. He has done this before for other people and he can do it for you. You would walk away. Eventually the story fades. In 5 years perhaps you resurface. Your life continues. Esther's voice was completely even. Or, she said, you walk out of this room and down the stairs and through that door and toward those police lights that will arrive in approximately 40 minutes. And you tell them the truth. And you begin, not end, but begin the work of settling what you owe. The room was very quiet. Angela looked at the woman in front of her. This woman who was and was not here, who was alive and not alive, who was present in a way that transcended whatever category her current state occupied. Will it fix it? Angela asked. Will anything fix it? No, Esther said without hesitation. Nothing fixes it. You cannot undo harm. That is the hardest thing about harm. It happened. It is permanent. It lives in the world now. What you can do, and here her voice shifted very slightly into something that Angela, years later, would describe as sounding like a door opening, is decide who you become in relation to it. Whether the Angela who did that thing on those steps is the final Angela, or whether there is one who comes after her. One who builds rather than takes, one who sees rather than overlooks. Angela wiped her face. She stood straighter. Something resolved in her expression, not closure, nothing so clean as closure, but a different kind of intention. Okay, she said. Okay, Esther said. And then she was gone. Angela found her father in his study at the back of the house, surrounded by the artifacts of 4 decades of power. Shelves of carefully chosen books, framed photographs with presidents and prime ministers and titans of industry, a desk the size of a dining table covered in papers and phones, and the controlled evidence of a man managing a crisis with every tool he owned. He looked up when she came in. He had not slept. She could see that. She could also see, for the first time, something she hadn't noticed before or hadn't let herself notice, how much of his certainty was performance. How carefully he held his face in that expression of unshakable authority, and how much effort that holding actually took. I've arranged transport, he said immediately. A flight leaves in 3 hours. Switzerland initially then. Dad, she said. He kept talking. We have a contact in the DA's office who can. Dad, she said again louder. He stopped. She stood in the doorway of his study and looked at him. This man who had built an empire and inside it had built a daughter in his own image, had taught her that power was the only currency that mattered, that compassion was a luxury the strong couldn't afford, that looking away from those who suffered was simply the cost of success. She came to me, Angela said. Esther, she came to me and she offered me something that I don't think you've ever offered me, and I didn't recognize it at first because I didn't know what it looked like. Samson was very still. She offered me accountability, Angela said. Not punishment, not destruction, accountability, the chance to know what I did and choose what I do about it. She took a breath. I spent 2 days inside her life. I know what I took from her, not just the end of it. I know what I was taking every time I looked past someone like her, every time I walked past, every time I treated a person like a prop in the backdrop of my own importance. Angela, I'm going to go to them, she said. When the police come, I'm not going to run and I'm not going to hide and I'm not going to let you spend another dollar making this disappear. Because it doesn't disappear. It just, she thought of Esther's word, compounds. Samson Steve was 63 years old. He had navigated 40 years of corporate warfare, political maneuvering, personal loss, and professional crisis without visibly breaking. He had buried a wife, survived hostile takeovers, and maintained the face of a man who had never encountered anything he couldn't master. He was quiet for a long time. And then he said very quietly, I made you into this. It was not a question. It was not a defense. It was the kind of sentence that a person only says once, and only when they have finally run out of distance to keep from it. You tried to, Angela said, but I'm not, she stopped, corrected herself. I wasn't only this, I don't have to end as this. He looked at his desk. He looked at the photographs on the wall, the presidents, the prime ministers, the titans. He looked at his daughter. "I'll come with you," he said. She looked at him. "Not to protect you," he said quickly. "Not to manage anything, just—" He stopped. And Samson Steve, billionaire, architect of power, man who had not cried in more than 30 years, made a sound that Angela had never heard from him, small, ragged, entirely uncontrolled. "I don't know how to be your father," he said. "I never learned. I only learned how to be your manager, your fixer. I turned you into an asset to protect instead of a person to know." He looked up at her. "I want to stand next to you, as your father, not to fix it, because I can't fix it, because you're right that it doesn't fix." He took an unsteady breath. Maybe that's one thing I can still choose to do right." Angela stood in the doorway and looked at her father, really looked at him. The way Esther had looked at her on the pharmacy steps, without assessment, without strategy, with the patient, costly willingness to see what was actually there. What she saw was a man who had made himself enormous, and in the making had made himself hollow. What she saw was also, underneath that, the memory of the father who had once carried her on his shoulders in a park somewhere, laughing, on a day before the weight of the empire had consumed everything, including that. "Okay," she said for the second time that morning. "Come on then." They walked out of the front door of the Steve estate at 23 minutes past 6 in the morning, as the first full sun of the day cleared the eastern tree line and turned the lawn a pale, particular gold. The police were arriving as promised, 2 cars, quiet, no drama, the way such things go when they're anticipated. The crowd at the gate had grown overnight and was still there, and when the doors opened and people recognized Angela, then her father beside her, a sound went through the crowd like weather. Angela walked toward the police. Her father walked beside her. She had not called a lawyer. She had not, since waking, consulted anyone except the woman who was no longer physically present and would, nevertheless, be present in some form for the rest of her life. The lead detective, a woman, which Angela noticed, met her halfway across the drive. "Angela Steve," she said. "Yes," Angela said. "I need you to come with us." "I know," Angela said. "I'm ready." She stopped, looked back once at the house, the marble, the art, the accumulated evidence of an argument her father had been making about power and worth for 40 years. She looked at it the way you look at something you are leaving, not without feeling, but without the feeling being a reason to stay. She turned back to the detective. "I want to make a statement," she said, "full, unedited. I want to tell you exactly what happened." The detective, who had been doing this for 19 years and had developed a fairly precise sense of who meant what and who was performing meaning, looked at Angela for a moment and then nodded. "All right," she said, "let's go." 3 months later, a community center opened in the Leland Avenue neighborhood, not named for anyone famous, not affiliated with any foundation bearing a wealthy family's name. It was named the Esther Okonkwo Learning Hub, at the specific, written request of Angela Steve, filed from the holding facility where she awaited trial. It offered free tutoring, legal aid, and emergency shelter referrals. Its operating budget came from a trust Angela had established using funds from her personal accounts. Not her father's empire, not a tax write-off, but her own money, chosen specifically because it cost her something real. Angela entered a guilty plea. She received a sentence that she served without appeal, without the army of lawyers her father could have provided, without a single motion designed to reduce, delay, or deflect. She asked through her lawyer for one thing, that during the trial the court allow a statement from Esther's family, her 3 adult children who had been located in Lagos and London and Toronto, to be read aloud. The court allowed it. The statement was short. It had been written by Esther's eldest daughter, a woman named Chinier, who was a schoolteacher like her mother and had Esther's handwriting. It said, "My mother believed that every person who causes harm carries, inside the harm, the seed of who they could become if they chose to face it. She told us this when we were small. She told us this was why teaching mattered, not to fill people with information, but to help them recognize who they already could be. She would not want Angela Steve destroyed. She would want her changed. And she would want to believe, as she always did believe, that changed is possible. We choose to believe it too. For our mother. They say that cities are just people, accumulated. That every building, every sidewalk, Every corner was made by hands and shaped by choices and carries in its structure the specific weight of who decided it would stand there and who had no say. They say the pharmacy on 5th and Leland has new steps now. Someone, nobody knows who, planted a small garden in the strip of soil beside them, winter-hardy plants, chosen to bloom even in cold weather. There is a small stone marker in the center of the garden, about the size of a book, with 2 lines carved into it. She was here, she belonged. No one has removed it, no one has tried. The rain, when it comes, falls on it the same as everything else. And that right there is where I want to stop. Because this story isn't really about Angela or Esther or the Steve Empire, or even that corner on 5th and Leland. It's about what we all do with the people we decide not to see. Because here's the real thing. Esther wasn't extraordinary because something supernatural happened around her. Esther was extraordinary because she was already extraordinary and the world had chosen not to notice. There are Esthers everywhere. On your corner, in your city, in the background of your walk to work. And the question the story leaves us with isn't what would you do if something terrifying happened, it's what do you do before that, when there's no supernatural reckoning. When there's just a person and a choice and no one watching. If this story hit you somewhere real, if you found yourself in it, whether you saw yourself in Angela at the start or Angela at the end, in Esther, in the crowd that filmed instead of helping, I want to hear about it. Drop it in the comments. Tell me what landed. Tell me which moment you're still thinking about. And if you're new here, subscribe, because this channel is built for exactly this, stories that don't let you off the hook, stories that sit with you. Share this one, not for the numbers, because there are people in your life who need this story right now, and you probably already know who they are. I'll see you in the next one.